Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate the Hate podcast. Thank you for joining me, and thank you to all the new listeners that are joining us for the first time. I am Wilk from wilksworld.com, and this is episode 3 of the Derate the Hate podcast. Today we're going to be talking about how do we deal with people who are perpetually offended, somebody who's offended all the time. But before we get started, I want to give a little plug to one of my other online ventures, something that I've been working on for a while. It's an apparel company called Failed Understanding Apparel. So Failed Understanding Apparel, to be sure, is just a gimmick line of shirts that I came up with different phrases to get people to create a dialogue with each other about concepts that some of them are funny, but some of them are serious too. Some of them are things that people really need to be talking about rather than just shutting down the subject. So check out our website, fuapparelstore.com, because some things are just better said with an FU. So I threw that plug in there because it does fit in with our subject today of dealing with those who are perpetually offended. I think we all know somebody or multiple somebodies who every time you're having a conversation or every time they see something on the news or hear something on the radio or whatever, they may be that uptight person who every time something is said that just is remotely off color or just remotely anything, they're like, oh, I'm so offended. Oh, I'm so offended. But, quite honestly, if you're offended all the time, you cannot be a happy person. And if you're offended all the time, nobody's going to want to be around you because you can't speak frankly with somebody who takes offense to every little thing that's said. Now, this does not mean that you can be rude or you should... here's an example. Okay, so you get a group of guys sitting at a table in a crowded restaurant or whatever, and they're throwing F-bombs around like crazy, and they're loud and they're crude, and there's people there with their kids and their wives and things like that, and there's no call for that. There's certainly a public decorum that needs to be held and maintained in a civil society. Otherwise, we're just all scumbags. But there's a difference between that public decorum that makes sense and somebody who has no tolerance whatsoever for real life things that people talk about without being, completely offended by everything. So let's get a little deeper into that. I'm sure everybody knows or everybody's come in contact with somebody who every time there's something that they disagree with, they've automatically got to equate it to racism. Oh my God, I can't believe you said that. It's so racist. When actually nothing that you said was racist. It's just that they didn't agree with whatever you just said, or sexism or what's the latest xenophobic because we want to close the border, something like that. It's not that we can have differing opinions and speak about differing opinions in a civilized manner. It's just automatically, oh, I'm so offended that you would say something like that, or oh, I'm so offended this, I'm so offended that. When in actuality, it's just the fact that we have differing opinions on something, and it's a go-to response for some of those people who have no ability to discuss the issue in a logical and sensible way. They've automatically got to resort to emotion, and then that emotion becomes something that it shouldn't be. The reality is this type of opinion and this type of, or not necessarily opinion, but this type of reaction actually waters down real racism and real sexism and real xenophobia, because those things, not every time we disagree with somebody on a topic does it have to resort to race, or does it have to resort to sexism, or does it have to resort to whatever the flavor of the day of the person who's offended is, because they will always find something to be offended by, and the reality of it is being offended by something is really nothing more, or constantly being offended. I mean, obviously everybody's going to be offended by something. But when you're offended by everything, it's not true offense. It's just trying to manipulate the situation and trying to manipulate the feelings of those who you are dealing with by acting offended. And manipulation in itself is hateful. And trying to manipulate the feelings of others and trying to manipulate the behavior of others through this perpetual offended mentality is very, very hateful. It's very toxic, and it should not be tolerated, and it should be called out. It's very important that we point out from time to time that just because you're offended doesn't mean you're right. I watch very little, if at all, any television nowadays because I think most of it's absolute garbage. It's just trash. But I do remember a day when we had shows on television that I don't even know if they would stand up on television nowadays because there would be too many people offended. But it was true classic comedy at the time. It was the Jeffersons and All in the Family with Archie Bunker and Sanford and Son with Red Fox and that kind of comedy was absolutely hilarious. But that kind of comedy today, in my opinion, based on what I'm seeing from people today, would be considered so offensive that you couldn't air it because somebody would end up all completely butthurt over it and crying and looking for a safe space. And the reality of it is without being able to tolerate differing opinions or tolerate some crude humor now and then or tolerate the ability to interject in some race-based humor or the battle of the sexes kind of humor or things like that. And I don't mean just just black people like George Jefferson making fun of the white neighbor or most certainly Archie Bunker just ripping apart ripping apart other races, things like that. No, it's got to go both ways. I get that, and it should be able to go both ways, but it can't just go one way or the other and be considered a racist thing if it's gone one way and a funny thing if it goes the other. I mean, I grew up watching comedians like Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor and Red Fox and Sanford and Son was one of my favorite shows as a child, and Lamont, you big dummy, that kind of thing was I absolutely loved it, and that was just absolutely a horrible rendition of Red Fox, but I loved loved movies like Harlem Nights as a kid, and sure they rip on white people, but we've got to get back to a situation where we can all treat each other equally, and that doesn't mean equally if it doesn't offend you, because it's only equal if it doesn't offend all of us, or doesn't offend some of us, and I don't know, I'm kind of rambling there, but the reality of it is we have to, as a society, get along with everybody and understand that all of us are a little bit different. We've got to be able to point out those differences and be able to point those out in a way where we don't have to coddle those who are trying to manipulate everything by equating everything to race or everything to sexism or everything to homophobia or xenophobia or whatever. That cannot be the way that we live, because manipulation, like I said, manipulating others through this perpetual offended mentality is nothing more than hate in and of itself. And what it does is it waters down real racism, and it waters down real sexism, and it waters down real xenophobia and homophobia and everything else. We've got to be able to make fun of each other. We've got to be able to make fun of ourselves, and we've got to get along and to equate everything and punk out everything and water down everything through automatically being offended by this, that, or the other thing is just absolutely garbage. I mentioned earlier that I don't watch hardly any television, if any television at all nowadays, and I couldn't even tell you what's on any channel for any shows, any sitcoms, anything anymore. And I think the real thing is when I when I realized that we had gotten to a point where the only comedy that could be tolerated and the only person that could be made fun of was the bumbling fool of the dad. The only buddy, or the only person, or the only character in the show that could be made fun of and made out to be the fool all the time was the bumbling fool of a dad, and that seemed to be the go-to thing. The mom was the smart one, and the mom had all of her stuff together, and dad was always the bumbling fool, and it just seemed to be a repetitive cycle of garbage, in my opinion. And there was so many shows that way. I'm not even gonna name them, and I'm not gonna get into it, but it seemed like every single show was the same thing over and over and over. Dad did this again, and it was stupid, and mom has to correct it, and dad did that again, and he broke this, and dad did that again, and mom has to fix this, or mom has to cover up for him, and mom's always the one that the kids go to because the kids don't respect the dad because the dad's a bumbling fool, and mom knows everything. And it just, that whole cycle of whatever, just to me, just got to be so repetitive and so much garbage that I had a lot better things to do with my time than waste it watching that same garbage. I mean, you could sub in different characters and sub in slightly different storylines and put a different title on the show, but it was all pretty much the same. And I got tired of it. Wasn't anything I needed to deal with. Wasn't anything I wanted to watch. So, but like I said, we have to get back to a point where we can all, if we're going to tolerate anything, we've got to tolerate a lot of things. And it's not, like I said, it's not just going to be something that I can tolerate, because a happy society has to be a tolerant society. And a tolerant society means being able to accept the existence or occurrence of things with which you do not agree. So, in order to be a happy society, we've got to be able to acknowledge and accept the existence of things with which we do not agree. So, we cannot continue to put up with and give the loudest voices to those who are perpetually offended by everything. Because, again, perpetually offended people are nothing more than hateful people who are trying to manipulate those around them and manipulate the behavior and the thoughts of those around them through their feigned outrage and their perpetual offended mentality. So like I do to wrap up each episode of the Derate the Hate podcast, I'd like to talk real quick about a good deed that's being done by a teen in Pennsylvania. Hita Gupna, and I'm probably saying that wrong. Hita Gupna is a 15-year-old sophomore who had been volunteering and doing a lot of things at old folks' homes and nursing homes prior to the coronavirus pandemic, and that all obviously came to a stop when they weren't able to do the visiting anymore. So she started putting together care packages with puzzles and handwritten notes from her younger brother, and they've been dropping those off at somewhere around 18, 19 different elderly care facilities in the Pennsylvania area, and with all the doom and gloom that we see in the news and everything else, I tell you what, it's stories like that got to inspire and encourage people. So I know she's got a GoFundMe page, and we'll put that GoFundMe page in the show notes for today. But with all the doom and gloom, and if it bleeds, it leads news, I like to wrap up the show with a good news story. So, way to go with your efforts, and keep on doing what you're doing. We'll put your GoFundMe page in the notes, the show notes, and to end, as I always do, I'm gonna say, when we can get back out there, make sure we're being kind to each other. Be grateful for everything you've got. And remember, it's up to you to make every day the day that you want it to be. So from all of us here at Wilkes World, I do want to say thank you very much for listening. Subscribe if you like what you're hearing, and share and comment if you'd like. Thank you.